Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. My guest today is Cara Cunniff, who is a friend of mine I've known for many years, but as we will say, it's our first ever podcast chat, which is really fun and interesting. And I wanted to get Cara on because she is a real expert when it comes to emotional culture. That's the phrase that she has kind of built and speaks about. And I feel as if this should have a real resonance for you in terms of how do we get people to feel safer and therefore be safer. So I'm certain you'll get a lot from this discussion. Take some notes, have a think about it, um, and do have a look at what Cara's doing. Use her scorecard, go and look at some of the free resources. I think this one will get your brain turning. So let me know on LinkedIn or whatever social media channel what you think. Would really appreciate some feedback. Hope you enjoy it. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Cara.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, we've had lots of conversations, but never a podcast.
Absolutely. First time for everything.
First time for everything. Yeah, no, it'll be good. So you've had a really interesting journey, haven't you, from the army to doing endurance sports, and now you're working in this kind of emotional culture space. Talk to us a little bit about that. How did your path sort of lead you to what you're doing now with Thrivewell?
So in essence, it's all about connection. Everything I have done as a reservist in the military, in psychological operations, as a military spouse, having been married for 25 years, I have moved and lived in, actually to date, we are looking at 32 houses, 32 homes. And at the heartbeat of all that is, how do I build relationships with people? How do I connect with people? Be that the hairdresser, the dentist, all those things that you need every single time you move house. And also, how do I actually build friendships? How do I fit into this new environment that I'm in? And so taking from the experience of being in business and working in different countries, having built and sold a company in Germany, and having built and run various businesses throughout being the life of a military spouse and the moving life of a military spouse, and also working in psychological operations, which is all about influencing through hearts and minds. And I've got a core belief that if the British military use psychological operations as a part of both, sort of, I say, warfare and peacekeeping operations, then surely in business, we ought to be prioritizing how we influence hearts and minds. How do we influence customers to buy from us? Because they don't buy rationally. I know we like to believe they buy rationally, but they don't. They buy first of all with their heart, and then they rationalize it with logic. The same with team dynamics. If you've got a team that maybe isn't gelling for whatever reason, what's really going on at the feelings level of that team? How do people feel when they're in that team or organization? Because of course, take the individual up to the team, up to the organization. You're talking about culture. You're talking about a complete ecosystem of emotion. And most of the time, the moment the word emotion is used, there can be that ick feeling. Emotion, we don't want emotions in the workplace. But actually,
This is business.
yeah, and I want to flip the script. It actually, let's work with emotions intentionally because they are shaping every single thing we are doing in business in order to perform. And you mentioned endurance sport. Well, it doesn't matter whether you're racing individually, as I have done sort of various long distance races, and it really is down to how you are emotionally feeling in that moment, as well as obviously all of the performance physical elements that you've put in place.
Mm.
It's really, and if you look up to team level, it's about the team, the sports team. Think about your favorite rugby team, your favorite football team. The mindset piece is fundamental within any form of team dynamics. So I'm very passionate about it for lots and lots of reasons, but I think really it's because we're human. At the end of the day, we're
Mm.
human and we have emotions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. So when you speak about emotional culture, what exactly, how do you define that? What does that mean? And then how does that differ from, you know, values, for example, or engagement metrics? How do we sort of
Mm.
clarify that?
So I like to see culture. We've got a thinking culture. We've got a cognitive culture within an organization. And often you will see that as maybe a poster. That might be a poster of the values that an organization wants you to act and behave through. So it might be integrity, it might be courage. We believe that we have courageous staff. What does that actually look like? Or maybe that's about taking risks. Maybe we want them to take risks. We want them to be courageous. But often those are seen very much as sort of posters. Often, in the reception area, you see, somebody standing on a mountain on a picture with the word courage above it. The work I do, and I see this like peeling an onion, it's the next layer. It's how do we connect the human emotion, the individual's feelings, to the cognitive culture. So how do I want to feel or need to feel within this organization to be successful? Okay, they want me to feel courageous. Well, how does that show up for me? How does that really show up for me in terms of how I feel? And then you build that out again. We've got, say, a whole organization that we want people to feel courageous. Well, if we want them to feel courageous or to act with integrity, then what do we need them to do? How does that show up? How do you want your leaders to show up? So, for example, if we have a team and there is a new leader that has just taken over that team, how does that leader want their team to feel in their presence?
Mm.
And I wonder if actually many people have ever thought that. When I walk into a room, how do I want other people to feel in my presence? Because if you want people to feel in a certain way, and this is the emotional culture piece, if you want them to feel a certain way, then you need to act a certain way to evoke those feelings.
Mm.
And vice versa, if you want your team to feel a certain way. So, for example, maybe we want our team to feel joy. Maybe we want our teams to feel comfortable. And maybe we want to feel valued and appreciated. Okay, so what do we need to do as an organization in order to show them that we value them, that we appreciate them? So it's that one level down from what I say is the cognitive. If you imagine the customer relationship, okay, a customer may just one day stop showing up and they just don't reinvest. At the end of the program, at the end of they bought that product 3 times and suddenly they just say, what, I don't want to buy that product
Yeah.
anymore. What often happens is we go to that logical, rational space. We go to, okay, what do I need to do differently? The first question actually is a step back. What are they feeling? What are they feeling? Yes, it's what's happened, but because maybe something has happened, what then are they feeling? So how do I change that feeling? How do I change
Mm.
that feeling so that they want to buy from me again? So it's how, it's how we start any form of action or behavior is how we feel. So
Mm.
when we look at the emotional culture of an organization, it may be that as an organization, we want our people, our teams, our individuals to feel, as I said, valued, appreciated, comfortable, maybe. But we also don't want them to feel undervalued. We don't want them to feel invisible. We don't want them to feel maybe trying to think what another one. Maybe we don't want them to feel rebellious. It depends on what industry you're in. Maybe we don't want them to feel rebellious specifically. So if we don't want them to feel those things, what do we have to do?
Mm.
And it all starts back at feelings. Feelings of the individual, the leader, the team, the organization. Because an organization has feelings. We are in an ecosystem of feelings and emotions and moods. And
Mm.
out of that are behaviors. I'm very passionate about this.
No, I get that, and I think it's going to be really resonating with the audience because within the world of um, health and safety, we speak about safety culture, and one of the interesting debates is, you know, does including that word safety actually cause more harm than good? Because
Mm,
how does the word safety make people feel? Well, sometimes it makes people feel how you might want them to feel, and other times it might make them feel like, oh, this is a waste of my time, or not them again, or health and safety gone mad. So there's all these connotations, aren't there? And it's interesting to think, and that's what I wanted to talk to you really was to sort of understand, well, what's driving that from an emotive perspective, and how can we better understand that, and therefore how should we approach it?
I think the first question is, what do you feel about the word safety?
Mm.
You know, I could put my bias, my perception, my logic onto what that word means to me. But again, if you're talking to your customers, what does that word mean to them? How do they feel when they hear that word? Within your teams, how do they feel when they hear that word safety? And to be honest, the first thing is to open the conversation. It
Mm.
really is about being able to talk about it. Because the moment we start to address this, then we can start to move forward. But often what will happen is I will believe one thing, you will believe another. We won't know that we believe different things. We can assume we probably do, but we don't know that definitely until we've opened that conversation. And really, when you start to talk about what do you feel about something, what you realize is your word safety means something to my word safety. Your word appreciated means something different to my word appreciated. So what we need to do is understand the narratives behind those words, understand the stories behind those words. So it might be that you say, well, do you know what? For me, well, I'll ask you, Christian, what do you think? What do you feel when you hear the word safety?
Um, it's interesting that, isn't it? Because I think it's something that we should all aspire to, and I see huge value in it, and I feel like it's underappreciated and it should be perceived as more important than it is.
Mm. And I know if I asked somebody within obviously you're working in the safety and risk area,
Yeah.
that word associated, and I know that sometimes I would see a risk assessment and I would think, I know that's there for safety, but oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I don't
Yeah.
really want to have to delve into that. And that will be because of the narrative that sits behind it. So obviously
Mm.
this is your business. The narrative for you is it's your business and you're passionate about it and you know how important it is. And as you said, you feel it's undervalued. So therefore, the work you do is about let's put value on this, and I want to show my audience the value in this. Um, and for me, in the emotional safety world, the psychological safety, it's about creating spaces within organizations that conversations can happen. That is fundamental because the moment we start to have better conversations, actually the business moves forward.
Yeah.
And that's addressing both um, emotions that are helpful and emotions that maybe are unhelpful.
And still valid because they exist and they're still going to have an effect on
Yeah.
what happens, right?
And I think it's important to also note that there isn't there aren't good and bad emotions. There are emotions. It is a perception. So an emotion may serve you both positively and negatively, depending on the context, depending on the situation, and depending on your background. So, for example, I chose the word rebellious earlier. Now, within my organization, actually, I want to instill the feeling that it is okay to be rebellious, because if you are rebellious, we're changing something here. We are, and we have to be rebellious to change something, to be out there saying, no, you need to be thinking about emotions. You need to be the one that stands up and says, have you heard about this thing called emotional culture? Well, I think we need to talk about it.
Mm. You can't get that happening if you're sort of, what's the opposite of rebellious? If you're sort of standoffish and a bit sort of shy and meek, and
Yes.
because
And maybe
those conversations are never going to
stagnant.
happen.
Yeah, stagnant,
Mm.
maybe stagnant. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a flip. There's no positive, there's no negative. It's just context and perception and the narratives that sit behind them.
Yeah. So that sort of emotional exploration, I think you've called it emotional
Coming.
explorers.
Absolutely.
Um, uh, I guess that's the first step, is that you've got to sort of encourage people to start that exploration.
Mm, just recognizing that, first of all, we all have emotions and we are all in an emotional state at every single moment of the day. And that will be being fed by whether we ate properly, whether we slept well, whether maybe we had a glass of wine last night, you know, and that's not me advocating one way or the other, but that affects your body budget.
Mm.
And if you want to put your best foot forward, then you need to know that we are investing and withdrawing from our body at all times. And so if we want to become an emotional explorer, it's yes, it is about in the moment. What do I need to do here and now? Maybe I need to manage my emotions in this situation. I've got something coming up. I've got a difficult conversation and I'm nervous about it. And I'm, I can feel maybe a little bit of stress in my body. But actually, did I take care of myself before I was even in that situation? So it's about exploring, and learning more about who you are as a person.
Mm.
What makes you tick? What triggers you? Starting to keep a journal, start to see patterns. Is there a pattern here? I always see, when I've had a really late night and I go into work and I just find I'm on edge all day. Okay, well, now you can recognize something. And it's in that recognition, it's in that exploration that you can start to decide to make another choice. When we talk about emotions, often there is that sense of the amygdala hijack. It's in this moment, and I have to either choose another course of action or I'm going to dive in and react to something. But just note that we are always in an emotional state. So it doesn't have to be just that moment when, the hits the fan. And actually, maybe your mood and the way you put yourself out there could be just improved because you had a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
And
So how sort of aware, or how um, successful, or how far, how are we doing, I suppose, at this? How if you sort of said, if I said, oh yeah, on average, out of 10, how well are organizations doing in this space? What would you say to that?
I would say there are some organizations who do very, very well at it, and they are emotionally intelligent organizations. They train their staff in emotional intelligence. they run training programs, they run coaching, they run that development piece so that you can become the explorer, so that you can get to know yourself better. And then there are organizations, obviously, at the other end of the spectrum, who pile on lots and lots of pressure and are surprised when their staff are just going up and down and up and down, and it's a bit like a yo-yo. So we've got ends of spectrums here, and something I like to lean into when you're looking at that is the pressure performance curve. So in essence, we should only be moving in and out of real pressure off and on for a period of time. It is okay to go into real pressured environments. It is okay, but we've got to be able to take a step back.
Yeah.
And if we don't take that step back, we are really putting too much pressure on our staff if we're also not skilling them in the fact that they will eventually, their bucket will just fill up, their bucket will overflow, and then don't be surprised when their bucket overflows. So I think in terms of AI, it's coming at us. People are becoming more and more stressed just by the presence of the AI.
There's a lot of
And
fear, isn't there? Yeah. Mm.
yeah, there is a lot of fear. And I think we need to be, as individuals and organizations, cognizant of the fact that the one thing that we still have completely within our control is us, is the employee. And that is your competitive edge. That is, the person who is on, the customer front line needs to be emotionally intelligent, needs to be in tune with what's going on for their customers. The same with the leaders and the teams. Is your leadership, are they all emotionally intelligent? Can they read the room? We've all had times where somebody walks into a room and you're surprised because you ask that question. Did they just not see what was going on? So I know that's I've given you a spectrum of those who are doing it very well and those who are doing nothing. I think there are certain industries that do it better than other industries.
Yeah.
And I think where you are really where you've got a lot of manpower, you really, really do need to be thinking about whether you are supporting your staff and developing their emotional intelligence, because it is an exploration. It's a journey. None of us are perfect because we're human. And sometimes we all get it wrong. But part of emotional intelligence is knowing I got it wrong. I'm going to do it differently next time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And that's that. As you say, that's an advantage, isn't it? That human side of us is a big advantage, and it's something that is unique to you, and you're not
Mm.
like everyone else, and that means you can stand out and do great things.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
and resilience, that's just part of emotional intelligence. Having difficult conversations is part of emotional intelligence.
yeah,
So it doesn't just sit in that box of become self-aware. It is and understand your social skills with other people. It's
yeah.
about connection and relationships.
Mm. Are there sort of particular, you mentioned about, we can go into stress for periods, but we can't be in it all the time. Are there certain milestones or events or triggers or whatever from a sort of business organizational perspective where, this is, you know, let's say, I don't know, redundancies or M&A or
Yeah.
something like that is happening, and that's a higher pressure. Is that where we need to be even more aware of what's going on with people's emotions?
There are certain triggers. You're absolutely right. M&A, change programs, transformation programs, where we're surprised when it's not working, and then we consider what have we done from the people perspective in terms of how they're feeling about the implementation of the system, and if we want them to feel on that they want to be on board, what do we need to do to create that feeling? So change is a real biggie. M&A, bringing, for example, two SLTs together. What are we going to do? Bring these senior leadership teams together and just, hope, we'll do team building days. But actually, how do they feel about that? And maybe if we're on two separate teams and I say to you, well, this is what I'm feeling about this. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm feeling that maybe we're not going to work together particularly well as a team because of X, Y, and Z. But the
Mm.
moment you use the I am feeling word or phrase, it's personal to you. No one can take it away from you. It's your own agency and it's valid. So those are big areas.
Mm.
I think, if I'm really honest, where have you got people? Bottom line, where have you got people?
Yeah.
But yes, big trigger areas are M&A and change.
Yeah. And I would sort of perceive that, industries like banking, investment banking would be not very good at this.
Mm.
And you would think that, maybe healthcare might be better because of what they do. But, perhaps I could be barking at the wrong tree.
I think you're right, and I think sometimes we've got the sort of legal industries because it can be the time for money. So there is just an external pressure on you all the time.
Yeah.
And actually, what often works very well are, and I do some work with some pharma organizations, and some of the pharmaceuticals, because they know how important their patient care is, the reason they're doing what they do is to look after their patients.
Mm.
Actually, they recognize that they need to be doing this for their own people. And I've tended to find that there is investment in pharmaceuticals. But you're
Mm.
right, there is and often there can be flippancy. I don't have time for this. I don't have time
Yeah.
for this. I've already got this. Like, I'm already doing it. I can do it. Well, my suggestion would be that if that is how you're addressing this, as in, I can already do this, I've already got this, then probably you need to do it. Because
Yeah.
none of us are perfect. And there is always work to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. I would think that there's probably a fair bit of lip service paid to this, like there can be in occupational health and safety as well. Yeah, we're doing this, or we're doing the minimum. We're doing the sort of bare minimum to sort of feel like we comply as such. But are we really doing it properly? Are we going above and beyond? Are we
Mm.
going to get the results that we need if we're just doing the minimum? Probably not.
Mm. Well, it just becomes isn't it? It's like a one-hit wonder, tick box exercise. And actually, real change can bring real performance. When you're looking at the performance equation, so you've got performance is equal to your potential, your complete potential, less your interferences. And interferences, distractions, phones, family, uh, interferences, emotions. And I have been in front of a leader in a healthcare organization who actually suggested that she would ask her employees to leave their emotions at the door when they came to work. And it's physically impossible
Mm.
because we're human. If you have stuff going on at home, it's not about bringing your baggage to work. That is absolutely not what it is, but it is about being able to be a human and to recognize that there are as many times as there are maybe the not so helpful emotions that we might be experiencing at whatever time. I'm in a house of A-level and GCSE students at the moment. I've got two of them, 2 exam years, and that's just the real world.
Mm.
uh, but in the same way, maybe on exam success day, she says, fingers crossed,
Yeah.
when I go to work, it'll be a joyous experience. So I will be taking all those other positive emotions with me.
Mm. Well, yeah, definitely keep my fingers crossed for you for that
Yes.
for later this year.
And for all those
Um,
other students out there.
yes, exactly. So you run, I think you call it is it called a Map Your Emotional Culture workshop?
Yeah, that's
Is that what
right.
it's called?
Yeah.
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 what does that look like? What does a session of one of those look like, and what kind of impact have you seen that exercise have on teams you've worked with?
So, Map Your Emotional Culture workshop can come as a one-off or a series. And it can come from a top-down approach within the organization, as in a senior leadership team is saying, we want to map the emotional culture of our organization. Or it could be that they say, actually, Team X, we want you to map your emotional culture and share your findings. And we use that to develop up from. So it can be top down, bottom up.
Yeah.
And the aim of the workshop is to bring together 5 or 6 desired emotions that you want your team to feel on a daily basis. And also identify the emotions that you don't want your team to feel. As an example, I don't want to feel silenced when I go to a meeting because Bob over there always takes over. Very, very small detail, but very important, because in those meetings is where creativity happens. And from that, what we then do is identify the rituals and the behaviors that are repeatable, and consistent, that will allow those desired motivations and emotions to show themselves. So, for example, if it's appreciation, how do we know that Joe is feeling appreciated? Okay, well, she comes to work and she's smiling. And there may be a series of things that she shows
Yeah.
that she feels appreciated, but also what as a team are we going to do to show her that we appreciate her? So maybe once a week we have an all stars board, or we have weekly check-ins in order to manifest more of that. And conversely, how do we reduce and manage those emotions that will show up, because we're human, they will show up, but we know what to do with them when they show up because we've talked about it. And you form a baseline, essentially. There's a baseline of 5 and 5. And then in a check-in, it's about actually putting scores next to those. It's a metric. It
Yeah.
is a metric. So you can score how well are we doing on the value of the team feeling comfortable, and you score it, and vice versa. So in essence, it's about designing the emotional landscape of the organization. And in terms of success, what works really, really well is when you've got an SLT who essentially define maybe 3 emotions they want the organization to feel. And then they let the teams decide 3 others for themselves. So you've got the guiding star, 3 emotions: valued, appreciated, comfortable. I keep using the same ones. Obviously, there are lots of
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah.
And then Team X has 3 others, Team Y has 3 others, and those are particular to them as a team. And then you have the check-ins. The check-ins are important, because how do we know we're progressing unless we have those conversations? But check-ins can be really quick. You're talking 15 minutes check-in. And from my perspective, my job is not to come in and be in an organization for months and months and months, unless it's a very large organization. That's not what I'm about. It's actually about instilling this into the organization so they can then lead it. And that part of that, along with the emotional intelligence piece, how do we learn to be the explorer? How do we learn to understand ourselves better? They go hand in hand, but ultimately the aim is just to go, right, you're now ready, or to onboard some champions to lead that forward within the organization.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating this for the audience of this podcast, because I see you could almost argue on one sense that this would be a great leading indicator for safety outcomes, because if people felt better, in whatever of those 6 emotions are that they need to feel, then they're going to be happier, they're going to perform better, they're going to be more focused, they're going to, etc., 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 and therefore the chance of them being hurt at work is much lower. But also, I suppose it's kind of like it's almost one and the same thing in a sense, isn't it? That actually you're never going to be safe unless you are emotionally uh, what's the right way of
Tu-
saying this?
Tuned.
Um, you're on the right side of that scale. Yeah.
Mm, mm. And what is fascinating
I didn't
is
want to say emotionally stable.
no, emotionally, yes, maybe
That's a bit
attuned,
triggery.
maybe
Aligned or attuned or something.
aligned,
Yeah, yeah,
attuned. Um, and inclusive. That's what also this is about. This is
mm,
about inclusivity, about being emotionally inclusive, because not
yeah.
everybody finds it as easy to talk about this stuff. So this is about,
No, I mean, I don't find it easy at all to talk about emotions. I find it really, really difficult. So yeah, that would be one person. Yeah,
but within the workshop space, all the work we do is through decks of cards. So I'm not eyeballing saying, how do you feel? What I'm doing is I'm offering choices. And through that, if you feel, oh, I don't want to talk about my emotions, but then you see a word, you say, gosh, I didn't know I was feeling that, but I am feeling that. And I recently had that with a leader who we had the deck of cards out with desired and undesired, and he saw the word alone, and he said, and actually he'd said at the beginning, I don't think I'm going to say a huge amount because I'm not sure this is my space, and that's fine because that's where you are on the journey. Uh, Within 20 minutes, he had said, I didn't know I felt alone, but I do,
mm,
because we'd given him a vocabulary for him to be able to
yeah,
voice that he felt alone. And so therefore the next question is, okay, you feel alone, so what can you do about that? What are you going to do differently? What can you do to change that feeling? And so we put in place, rituals, actions. It's an action plan essentially to move from that feeling of being alone to being part of something. And I think it's really important with the return to office that we're working in now,
mm,
this new I'm not even sure what to call it, state, I suppose, that we're in with organizations bringing their employees back. And there is strong feeling that maybe I don't want to be here. But
yeah,
actually, I think it's really important that those feelings are voiced in a safe and facilitated way. This isn't a free for all where you just put out your feelings. This is a safe and facilitated space where we understand, well, if you feel this, what can we do to alleviate that? Because maybe you have to come back to work. It's
mm,
a non-negotiable, but
yeah,
that doesn't mean your feeling isn't valid. Feelings need to be visible and valid so that we can do something about them. They need to be validated.
yeah.
So yeah, so I think it's a fascinating conversation around where you are on the journey, and it gets easier on the journey as well, I
Mm,
would say.
yeah. Once you've uh, the expression that comes to my mind, I don't want to use because it's got a negative connotation. But once you've started once you've kind of started that and done taking the first step, the next step is going to be easier, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because actually it's the story behind the feeling. It's actually not about the feeling. It is about the feeling, and that's what opens the
Yeah,
door. But it's actually the story behind the feeling that
yeah.
we explore.
Hmm. Last few questions,
Mm.
Cara. What would you say is the emotion that is most misunderstood or undervalued in the workplace?
No, I've never been asked that before. And I would say
Ah, there
that
we go.
because, no, I love it. I would say that because every every workplace has its own set of unsaid values
Mm,
and, sorry, emotions. I think probably it's the feeling of value and appreciated,
mm.
because we all want it.
Yeah,
We all want to feel valuable, and we want to feel that we are appreciated. And if we have a team leader that doesn't understand that or can't read the room or isn't comfortable themselves in showing that, the damage that can happen to a team is huge, huge.
Mm.
And of course, there is something called emotional contagion, which is, I have a feeling, I bring it to work, I'm the team leader, and you start to dread me coming to work on the day that maybe I'm on the 5-2 diet and I'm hungry and I've come to work, and because I'm hungry, I'm talking about body budgeting again. And this is not
Yeah.
about the 5-2 diet.
No, no. Yeah.
Makes
Just
such
an
a
example. Yeah.
difference. It's just an example. But if you come to work and you're always grumpy, and people start to dread those days that you come to work and you're grumpy, then that starts to create its own ripple effect within the organization. And so, in the same way that we have emotional contagion for, grumpiness, I feel grumpy, we can also have that for I feel appreciated, because it's
Mm.
feeling appreciated. Then you want to give appreciation because you're being shown how to give appreciation. And that is why it is so important for leaders of organizations to understand this, because they create the ripple effect. They are the role models of the
Mm.
organization. And if you've got lots of and particularly with the high churn that we are seeing in organizations, if you
Yeah.
are not role modeling that successfully, then there is a far greater risk to the organization than you will ever know. Because it's unsaid. It's
Mm.
the silenced hidden piece that isn't being put forward, and
Yeah.
it's dangerous.
Mm. Are some countries and cultures better than us Brits at doing this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there is it's very big in New Zealand. It's
Right.
very big
Yeah.
in New Zealand. I think sometimes we might believe certain cultures are very good at it because of their confidence.
Mm.
But just because they have an overt face of confidence doesn't mean they feel confident. So we
No.
might
Yeah.
perceive certain nations as being very good at it, but actually, are they really reading the room? It's
Mm.
just that they have this outward face of confidence.
Yeah.
Um, I think we are all on a learning journey, and I think within the next 2 or 3 years, this is really, I mean, it is already blowing up. It's, I was explaining to you
Mm.
earlier, I'm a leadership coach, I'm a performance coach and facilitator trainer. But the moment I really niched down, because I've always spoken about this, I've always spoken about the emotional piece. But the moment I really, really niched down into the connection, which is my passion, it was like the floodgates opened. It was like the
Mm.
floodgates opened with, organizations saying, "Gosh, we didn't even know this stuff existed, but we know
Mm.
we really need you."
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great. It's great to hear because it is an important topic, isn't it, for sure?
Mm,
Um, so you mentioned the importance of leaders.
mm.
What would be an action, a small but sort of meaningful action that someone who's joining us today could take, as a leader in the next week to sort of start improving emotional culture of their organization?
So, a question to ask themselves: how do you want your team to feel in your presence? Sit down. If you haven't got access to, know, um, your own vocabulary, which develops over time, if you don't feel you're there, just pull up an emotional wheel on the internet. Put it up and look at the words and say, okay, how do I want people to feel in my presence? That could be a team, it could be a department, it could be whatever size, it could be two people, it could be just someone you're working with.
Yeah.
So, how do you want people to feel in your presence? How do you want them to not feel in your
Mm.
presence? So, that's the first thing. Really simple,
Okay.
but give yourself some time to journal it. And I think there is just one other like ritual that just goes a long way, and it's saying
Mm.
thank you.
Yeah.
Sounds obvious, but it's not always done.
No. No. Mm. I like that. Um, and if someone's curious to sort of explore that in this in a bit more depth. Where would you recommend they start? Where can they find more from you? Where can they connect with you? Have you got any sort of resources you recommend or anything like that?
Yep. So LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn, Cara Cunniff, 2 N's, 2 F's. I know you'll put it out there on the
Yeah.
blog, but yeah,
Oh no,
LinkedIn.
I don't like LinkedIn. What are you on about?
Yeah, exactly. I see you on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, and then I've got a scorecard which is accessible, and I will send that again to you, Christian. And I've also got a resource pack website. There are lots of ways to find me. So if I
Yeah.
will, you will have that information, and you can send that out on my behalf.
Perfect. We'll pop all of that in the show notes.
Yeah.
All right, last question then.
Mhm.
What's the emotion that you're leaning into on a personal level for the rest of this year, and why?
Joy. It's joy for me. I just want to feel joy in everything I do. And that's often the very small things. Maybe it's the jobs I don't like doing, the jobs where I think, oh, this is really boring and really dull, but I have to do it. Finding joy in those moments is a gift. And we are a long time dead.
Yeah.
We got to make the most of every single minute we have here.
Mm. Mm. That great philosopher, The Rock, I saw did something,
Mm,
mentioned something about that. So he said, um, rather than framing something as like, I've got to do this,
mm,
frame it as I get to do this. So then you're
mm,
sort of turning it into that, that, like you say, those tasks that we all have to do, we don't really want to do.
mm,
I get to do this and take pride in it. And maybe that would, yeah,
mm.
deliver a bit of joy from it as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good stuff. Great. Well, thank you so much, Cara. Really valuable. I'm sure the audience will learn a lot and can take these learnings and transpose them into a benefit in the world
Yeah.
of safety. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.